everybody. So I've been out here with my friend Jen, who is an expert, amazing activist around housing rights and knows her way in and out of the affordable housing depredation of the city of Philadelphia. Is quite an amazing warrior. And so we've been telling exactly some of the mechanics. We're outside of Project Home. Project Home is a NGO that's connected to the Catholic Church here in Philadelphia. The Project Home is the first user of Pay for Success finance in the city. And as you know, if you follow me, that's the Human Capital Bond Project. So they're doing a lot, as Jen was telling earlier, consolidating scattered site housing, vouchers for housing in neighborhoods, flipping it out so those houses are then sold out from under the people, families, and then turned into dormitory-style, small-size, single-unit house under the control of Project Home. Now, the human capital bond markets run on these self-improvement pathways for people who are unhoused, people who are dealing with addiction. And so all of the things that I've been talking about with these public-private partnerships, Project Home is the type of institution that's running those, okay? And they've been doing a lot of work around consolidating and limiting housing access, taking the fluidity out of the housing access and transforming these vouchers into conditional vouchers that we know will be attached to the internet bodies ultimately. And Jen was saying they know who, if you have a guest, they know if you have a beer. Now imagine all of these set up with Alexas and Ring doorbells and smart refrigerators and smart toilets, what that would look like. That data stream to feed into also the AI beyond the surveillance state. So I'm here today. We are going to be launching pretty soon a platform called Inspired Ground. You can look for it at the inspiredgroundproject.com. And we are doing these revocation ceremonies. We're going to be doing them in working with people all over the world to talk about human capital bond markets and what's coming with the fourth industrial revolution and stakeholder capitalism. And faith communities are playing a major role because they will be channeling global financial money and controlling access to basic needs, including shelter and reskilling and food access likely too. So I'm here, I don't know, Jen, if you could just show, I've got my little ladies here. These are the little dolls that I made, the little puppets from the Wharton Business School. So we were withholding consent from the Wharton Business School. I have my piece of driftwood. We had our launching ceremony at the Council on Foreign Relations on Park Avenue in New York on Sunday. So that little piece of wood there with the knot, with the eye, that is the anti-panopticon. That is the eye of the natural world and Mother Nature, that we are standing for people's connection to the natural world, not the planetary computer. And then I've got a little bit of sage here. I also have a couple of tokens. One is a piece of transferware. This is also out of the Schuylkill River. And you know, this is talking about global supply chains. This is 19th century pottery. That was for consumer culture. So now consumer culture is changing to the digital world. And then I have, this is a piece of driftwood. This is driftwood from the Great Salt Lake. So I went out to Salt Lake City because a lot of the intelligence that's coming along with this is coming out of Salt Lake City, Silicon Slopes. And it's not just the Vatican Bank that's running these programs. It's also other faith institutions like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so this is from Salt Lake City, and this is the natural world. So I'm here to say today that we revoke consent to the human capital bond markets, to Pay for Success finance, to theological techno-fascism, to the idea of putting one's faith and spiritual connection to source and the creator on blockchain. We're here to say all of that. We revoke consent, any consent given or implied. So I'm going to leave these little tokens with our intention for a better world. We're here today with some beautiful children. We are not leaving our children a world of 6G digital twinning and cyborg avatar capitalism and people nares People like Stephen Ross, who make hundreds of millions of dollars in affordable housing and hold on to portfolios of dispossessed people who are put out of work by the fourth industrial revolution and automation. Say no to that. We're going to have a beautiful world where people can use their gifts, people are valued as individual human beings, people are cherished, where we have a connection to nature, and that where we are better relatives than that. Where we practice a faith of compassion and caring, not profit and predation.
Another option that you may have under.
So I'm just going to read a poem here, because I think this speaks to this idea that what Project Home represents, whether they know it or not, is a future of consolidated dormitories with smart sensors that run these bond markets, where we're trapped under the threat of a biosecurity state, away from the natural world and away from real experience, where we are forced to live in a virtual reality headset. And this poem, it speaks to someone looking at an image, in this case a painting, about the Susquehanna River. But in this case, you can replace the idea of a painting with a digital simulation, because that's what they're building with the Oculus Rift headsets. And they've actually got it down at the Barnes Foundation, I think, the Van Gogh. You don't see real art anymore. You just live in an immersive media consumption world. So this poem is called Fishing on the Susquehanna in July. I've never been fishing on the Susquehanna, or on any river for that matter, to be perfectly honest. Not in July or any month have I had the pleasure, if it is a pleasure, of fishing on the Susquehanna. I'm more likely to be found in a quiet room like this one, a painting of a woman on the wall, a bowl of tangerines on the table, trying to manufacture the sensation of fishing on the Susquehanna. There is little doubt that others have been fishing on the Susquehanna, rowing upstream in a wooden boat, sliding the oars under the water and then raising them to drip in the light. But the nearest I have ever come to fishing on the Susquehanna was one afternoon in a museum in Philadelphia, when I balanced a little egg of time in front of a painting in which that river curled around a bend, under a blue cloud ruffled sky, dense trees along the banks, and a fellow with a red bandana, sitting in a green flat-bottomed boat, holding the thin whip of a pole. That is something I am unlikely to ever do, I remember saying to myself and the person next to me. And then I blinked and I moved on to other American scenes of haystacks and water whitening over rocks, and even one of a brown hare who seemed so wired with alertness, I imagined him springing right out of the frame. And that is Fishing on the Susquehanna in July by Billy Collins, 1998. So I'm here today to revoke a future where you only imagine what it is like to fish on the Susquehanna River. Because that is a majestic and ancient river, and it is a powerful river, and we are connected to one another through the waters. We are water beings. We are beings of water and carbon, not silicon and electricity. So I'm here today to say we are here for real life experience, lived in the real world, not in a single room, affordable housing unit controlled by a blockchain religious protocol. We're going to do better for the kids. And as my friends say, Cliff and Yvonne, we already won. We already won this. We just have to do the work. And I'm very proud today to be here doing this work in some small measure with my friend Jen, who has been out here every day this week and has given more of her life than you can imagine, trying to hold people accountable to do the right thing. She could use some help.
Folks, I am just doing a little bit of a Facebook Live now as a follow-up to a little informational sort of picketing that we did outside of Project Home earlier this week with my friend Jennifer Bennetch, who is a housing rights advocate in the city of Philadelphia and anti-gentrification work in North Philadelphia. So she had been doing picketing all week that week against Project Home, and Project Home and Sister Mary Scullion are connected to the Catholic Church here in Philadelphia and have been providing housing and wraparound services and various things connected increasingly to computer access and wellness systems for quite a number of years. And they're actually the entity that's one of the first ones doing pay for success finance in the city of Philadelphia. And Sister Mary Scullion is very connected in with the impact investing community. When Total Impact had their first sort of conference here in Philadelphia in, I believe it was 2018. May of 2018, at the Sierra Center, she actually gave the opening welcoming remarks. So sort of like giving her blessing to this room full of very affluent impact investors who are looking to invest in poverty. And then in 2019, the city of Philadelphia undertook a major program, a city council initiative of developing a poverty committee and having all of these hearings around poverty. But what most people weren't aware of was that the impact investing space was about to be transformed into this giant global equity market in poverty management. And so it became very clear to us who were actually attending these events and trying to provide public testimony, sometimes at great difficulty because they only wanted certain people to be allowed to speak in these events, was that they weren't looking at anything structurally. Even, when I raised issues around housing and that we needed living wage jobs and that our regional workforce development plans were that a vast majority of the high growth jobs were under $15 an hour, which are totally impossible to sustain a family in the city of Philadelphia and in a stable housing situation with jobs at $15 an hour. Like they hadn't even occurred to them to look into the issue of wages or the gig economy, which is clearly what's underway, and certainly not the fourth industrial revolution or the Great Reset or, any of these things. So I'm linking this follow-up to some video that I did earlier in the week on Thursday afternoon with Jen. And I just wanted to take a minute to follow up on some information that I received when I was out there. So I took some photos of the outside of the building as well as on the door, and it jogged my memory that Project Home is a partner in something called Bennetch, Benephill. So Bennetch essentially is part of a national networks of the Benefits Data Trust. And this Benefits Data Trust is connected, it's funded, they got a large grant from Chan Zuckerberg, so that's Priscilla Chan and Mark Zuckerberg. And our local division, this Bennetch, it's about essentially using technology to match low-income people up with with not just housing benefits, all sorts of public benefit systems. And so just to be clear, I'm not saying in any way that people should not be able to have the access to a robust social safety net, particularly the people who are ostensibly being served by this program, people with HIV/AIDS, people, homeless veterans, people in foster care. People definitely deserve to have access to supports that help them live stable lives, for sure. But what we know is that the intention is to gut the public social safety net and remake it as these public-private partnerships with data-driven nonprofit entities putting people on pathways. And so it's much more about limiting people's economic independence and then putting them and making them dependents on the state, and then increasingly creating really intense prescriptive protocols about if you're going to access these benefits, how it has to be done. And now with the Internet of Bodies and wearable technology and databases and data analytics, the level of repression that is going to be imposed on people who need access to these benefits is ramping up in exponential ways. So one of the things Jen had mentioned was that Project Home had been essentially our Philadelphia Housing Authority. We have a lot of scattered site housing in Philadelphia. A lot of it is older housing, row houses. We're a historic city, but these row houses would be 4 or 5 bedrooms. They would, easily hold a family, and that the Housing Authority allowed those houses to deteriorate. They did not put investments into these houses, and they actually tore down many high-rise houses, which weren't necessarily the best, the high-rise housing, but that was torn down, and then those units were not replaced. And so we have over a 10-year waiting list to access subsidized housing in the city of Philadelphia. So what the Housing Authority was doing was that they would remove people from homes, saying something like, oh, well, we need to make a renovation or repair on your home. But they wouldn't actually do that. They would remove the people and then they would flip the house to a developer. This is in North Philadelphia and West Philadelphia. Places that were redlined but are now gentrifying, and then they would transfer the housing voucher over to an entity, often Project Home. And so Project Home, again, has ties to the Catholic Church. It's no big surprise that the head of the Philadelphia Federal Reserve had ties, no longer, but had ties to the Catholic Relief Services. And so Project Home would start to consolidate these vouchers and then create multi-unit housing, but for very specific purposes. Like to access this housing, you had to fit this criteria. And generally, this housing was not for families. It wasn't for people with families. It was for individuals, particularly individuals who were being targeted for wraparound services, whether that was treatment for substance issues or workforce development or, mental health care. So it was almost as if these centers, which were not geared towards families, geared towards individuals, but not geared towards individuals to live in for any length of time, because you can't have a normal life in one of these. You can't have company, you can't have a partner, you can't necessarily, pursue your modes of entertainment the way you might want to in, what's essentially sort of like sets of studio or sort of small apartments. And one of the ones she had talked about was there was a unit just about a block away from where we stood. And she said there was a young woman who was there and she had a baby. And then as soon as she had the baby, she no longer had that housing. But the voucher wasn't with her. She couldn't transfer her voucher to some other living situation. It just stayed with this unit that was controlled by Project Home. Now, Project Home has long been connected to Comcast, and they were doing a lot around internet access, which on the one hand sounds wonderful to provide, like bridging the digital divide for low-income communities. But we know that the technological systems, there's definitely a flip side to that. And then increasingly they're investing in community wellness centers, which if you didn't understand that the wellness industry was going to be linked to Internet of Bodies data collection, you might, it might sound great. But if you imagine this is an impact market, the kind of people who are sitting in the room at Total Impact that, Mary Scullion provided over the welcoming prayer at their initial conference, then it becomes a little bit more Black Mirror with these wellness centers and with these computer training centers, what exactly is going on with that, especially when people are having their options limited in terms of their housing and having that under control. So I just wanted to add a little bit onto this just to remember about the Benephili, because I've talked a lot about this idea of the game of behavioral economics and putting people on like continuum of care pathways and then betting on their compliance and monitoring their compliance. And I do believe that Benephili locally in my community and the Benefits Data Trust that is being pushed by Chan Zuckerberg is part of this shift towards programmable money, that people will be given access to benefit systems, but they will no longer simply have the flexibility built into them to make some of their own decisions and have some of their own autonomy, that it will be very closely tracked and regulated. So Benephili actually got in 2018, they were awarded a grant called the Communities Thrive Challenge Grant. And that was a partnership between the Rockefeller Foundation, which we know all about the Rockefeller Foundation, and Chan Zuckerberg. So they each put in $5 million to this program, so $10 million total. And then they picked winning communities that each got $1 million in that. So Benephili was one of the ones that got this Community Challenge Grant. And I'm just I have my little sis open here just to go over they're partnered with a number of not just Project Home, but also organizations working with homeless veterans, HIV positive individuals, people who are housing insecure, and I think also the elderly are being targeted for this. They're getting funding from Pew Charitable Trust, which is working closely with MacArthur on results-based, what works government. They've been doing data-driven government for a long time, and I'm very familiar with their work in the pre-K space. But again, it's the sort of Moneyball government work with MacArthur and this larger Results for America issue. That's Pew. And then the United Way. So I've spoken before about the United Way, that they have this ALICE program, which is it stands for Assets Limited Income Constrained Employed. So that's ALICE. So the United Way's hands are in on this too. And, they're talking about this in these poverty reduction committees for city council. But we're realizing that if you actually wanted to reduce poverty, that you would develop a regional economy that paid people more than $15 an hour, head of household more than $15 an hour. But really what is going to be coming with the jobs that are going to be offered is that you barely scrape by, and you're going to need a housing assistance through one of these entities like Project Home. And then that's going to come with a lot of strings attached, particularly if they start to move towards programmable benefits or sort of like a digital currency benefit system. So as far as the benefits data trust, I just wanted to take a minute to say who these folks are. Wait a minute, let me put this in. So they're connected to a number of partners. This is national. They're working with the state of North Carolina, the state of Colorado, the state of South Carolina, the state of Maryland, in addition to Philadelphia. They're working with the National Council on Aging. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is a part of this, so that's a lot of this managed big pharma healthcare. And other foundations that are involved, the Robin Hood Foundation. So I've talked a lot about the Robin Hood Foundation, that the Harlem Children's Zone was the model for data-driven wraparound services. So they're in there, as well as the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation. And the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation actually also have a project ongoing with JDC Israel about doing setting up systems of impact metrics for social welfare services. And they're involved in the EduCare, which is the data-driven pre-K investment fund. So there are definitely hands of all of the impactors in this space. Walmart is a partner. Walmart is looking to they're very much in the workforce development reskilling area, as well as health centers and workforce pathways. The Jewish Federation of Philadelphia, Colorado Health Foundation, Rockefeller, Chan Zuckerberg. There's something called Twilio, which is text-based customer services. So this is all about the nudge. They're going to send you texts and reminders to be more financially responsible. It is important to know that the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth is a partner in this, as well as the Gates Foundation. So all of this sense of programmable money, a continuum of care pathways, removing people's economic independence, forcing them into state welfare dependency, and then managing them really as assets within that state system is a huge problem. And then one of the last things I wanted to mention, that the National Interoperability Collaborative is one of the partners. Let me see. So they are about data-driven, this data-driven society. And when I first got started in this, I initially came into it through Data Zone, which was data mining children in San Jose, California. And then it expanded into sort of the larger region, like 500,000 kids around San Jose. And it was mostly pre-K data, foster care data, juvenile delinquency data, social emotional health data. So all these data sets. But it was predominantly school-based data. And then it pivoted, and this became part of something called the Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust. Now, the Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust was funded largely, again, by Chan Zuckerberg. Now, Chan Zuckerberg is funding also things like Character Lab, right? So they're going to tell you what your good character is. And at that point, from when it shifted from the Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust into the Stewards of Change National Interoperability Collaborative, it became almost exclusively healthcare data and like public health data and all other kinds of data. And increasingly also, the other thing about Benefili is they're using AI. So they're using artificial intelligence to track people and then match them with their benefits. So we're supposed to feel really glad that we're being managed by AI to maximize the benefits that we get. Stewards of Change and National Interoperability Collaborative, in addition to being connected to Microsoft and IBM and quite a number of the people who are working in these medical passports programs, it's all health data. And it's also one of the partners is the National Fusion Centers. So these are in the National Councils on Crime and Delinquency. And so there's this sense of I couldn't quite imagine why you were having criminalization elements in with your healthcare data. And this was 2 years ago, right? And clearly this is before we know what's going on with, essentially the biosecurity state and the Internet of Bodies control and biosensor control and, show me your papers type of passport systems. But now you can be criminalized for simply being a healthy person who wants to have some sort of privacy around your health data. But all of this is connected to impact markets and Johns Hopkins and Michael Bloomberg and Bill Gates. But you wouldn't necessarily know because like I said, I'm going to show this image, but it's simply, a picture on the door that says benefits, the benefits data trust. And most people would have no clue when you're talking about trying to connect people in need with services that could be a danger to them, right? That could actually put them in a situation that they never are able to escape being managed under data surveillance in the Internet of Bodies in a world that is increasingly post-human, like that these folks would be separate. Like Jen was saying, Philadelphia has some of the highest levels of family separation, children being taken from their families, not because of abuse, but simply because families are poor and they're housing insecure. So essentially that is being framed as neglect, and then they are breaking up families. And the head of our Child Protective Services unit, she's on the board of United Way USA, which is again part of ALICE, part of this impact market. And we have these really soaring rates of family separation because now that there are markets in it. And then if you can break down families and separate people and put them in these dormitory situations with managed public benefits on pathways that they never got off of, you're both containing them and managing them. And the programmable money and the programmable benefits are central. It's not strictly just about the central banking digital currency. It's also about how the programmable money and the smart cards and the smartphones on which your digital wallets will live will be part of that. So one last thing I did want to mention. So the CEO of Benephilly, the person's name is Trooper Sanders, just by way of a bit of background on that. He was the former advisor of something called Hello Wallet. If that gives you any clue about these digital wallets. And it was sold as a benefit, an employee benefit, that they would package your savings and credit cards and investing accounts and then give you digital nudges based on tracking all of your finance. And we know that finclusion and financial education for the poor, like tracking how the poor manage the limited assets they have, is one of these impact markets. So the fact that the gentleman he was an advisor to this Hello Wallet product is problematic. He was a policy advisor to the Obama administration. He was a speechwriter for Tipper Gore. He was an international affairs advisor to Michelle Obama. He was a former fellow in artificial intelligence and inequality with the Rockefeller Foundation, on the board of the Girl Scouts. So there you go. There you've got your badges. And also the Prince of Wales International Business Leaders Forum. So then there we have the crown involved. He came out of the University of Michigan, but got masters at the University of London and London School of Economics. This stuff is really happening, and it's happening in ways that you don't fully appreciate. Like I said, this Project Home Place that we went and we did this sort of public picketing. It's 10 minutes or so from my house, a quick bike ride, and it doesn't. And people are frustrated because at the same time, people desperately need this help. They desperately need this help, and they know that. And then we can look at what's happening in Australia with their disability benefits, that they were blockchaining those early on with programmable money. And so the precedent is already set. The World Bank is already ready to create these human capital bonds on blockchain, and it will be on blockchain. So, as we're building out the spatial web, and these poor people who are being put on workforce pathways will probably be compelled to try to code it, to clean up the data for the autonomous vehicles that they won't be allowed to ride in unless they have a medical passport or something like that. So anyway, I'm just going to pair this with my previous videos so people have a more comprehensive look. But I would just encourage, if you're not quite understanding just the level of abusiveness that's going on around public housing, I would encourage you look up my friend. Her name is Jennifer Bennetch, and she is a fierce warrior in this space. Her house was firebombed by individuals when she started looking into this. Project Home, there were individuals who were trying to get her involved and have her family broken up directly. And it's a big deal. If you control people's food and you control people's housing, that gives you an incredible amount of power over society. So
Project Home took the voucher from the unit, trying to explain it in plain English, but let's just say this is the PHA scattered site right here. 5 bedrooms, right? You've been living there with your kids 15 years. PHA comes and says, oh, we gotta fix the roof and you can't live here while we're doing it. So we're gonna move you out to this apartment in the Northeast, and then you can come back after we fix the roof. Then PHA goes in, and they're like, we aren't fixing nothing. We're going to deem this unit as non-viable. They write a certification that the unit is non-viable, even though they're spending $400,000 per unit of new construction. So there's not a single home owned by PHA, no matter how dilapidated it is, that will cost more than $400,000 to repair. So they're all viable, but a lot of them are actually livable. But anyway, they deem it as non-viable. They convert the unit to RAD, which is a Obama-era HUD demonstration, rental assistance demonstration. When they convert the unit to RAD, then they transfer the voucher, the assistance that was paying for the rent for that unit to Project Home or whatever entity they're collaborating with, but 80% of them go to Project Home. And so Project Home gets the voucher, right? And they do like what we saw in the Philly Voice last week. We're building 50 units of permanent supportive housing for recovering addicts in Kensington, right? And everybody's like, oh, this is cool. They're building housing for homeless people addicted to drugs, blah, blah, blah. PHA is helping fund this. It would be cool if they didn't steal the vouchers. They couldn't fund this without getting rid of 50 row homes that have permanent public housing vouchers that transfer with the tenant. So they take those vouchers, and then under the RAD Section 18 disposition blending, PHA can then sell the unit at the auction. So the unit goes off the private developer. So not only are they building institutions where they coerce poor people's behavior by holding their housing over their head and force them to submit to all these ridiculous things, and they can't have their kids spend the night, and they can't have their partner spend the night, and they can't get pregnant, and they can't have a baby, and they can't have a beer, and they can't do this. But they're speeding up the process of displacement. So it's two evils at the same time. It's like we're gonna just build these institutions, we're gonna call them permanent housing, but nobody is living forever in a recovery house, a place where they can't have company, a place where they can't have a beer, a place where they have to be in at a certain time, a place where they can't come back in if they're not in at a certain time. No, it's not even permanent housing. But on top of all that, they're selling our whole neighborhood. Look around Francisville. Just look around. Just look around. It's all public housing. Mostly black people, Puerto Rican people in this neighborhood. Who do you see now? You see the people that are renting from the developers that PHA sold the public housing units to after Project Home took the transfers of assistance and built institutions outside of these gentrifying neighborhoods. So it's a really sinister and evil process that's happening, and it's a mix of really multiple HUD programs moving to work. That's the program that allows PHA to move all the money around to do these fake programs to control people. Oh, we'll do this and we'll waive all these. They're allowed to move money and like waive HUD requirements if they're like a mitigating circumstance, like we're helping mentally ill people or addicted people or people suffering from this or that. Then they could like just move the money, just do it. They take the capital budget and put it in their salary, and they could take the funding for the repairs and put it over here, and then they could just like waive all these HUD requirements and approve units that aren't fit for human habitation, or downsize replacements. Instead of replacing a 5-bedroom with a 5-bedroom, replace it with an efficiency. So it's really moving to work, RAD, and choice neighborhood grants, and these opportunity zones. And they're all working together. Each of these programs have like these loopholes that allow like Housing Authority and Project Home and other entities to do like shady stuff. And they've like mastered using all these programs together to use all the loopholes and destroy everything and destroy our whole communities. And I've been out here every day this week, and I will continue to be out here every day. It's April, it's warm, it's sunny, it's bright. Fairmont Avenue is very nice. And I'll be out here every day until Mary Scallion, that evil satanic nun of the Vatican that stole the black parish from Miss Jackie's congregation in 1999. Yeah, do you remember that, Mary Scallion? Well, commits to not taking any more vouchers from 2, 3, 4, and 5 and 6 bedroom row homes in their community and replacing them with efficiency apartments in their institutions until they further commit that any transfer of assistance they take, they replace the unit room for room in a similar building in the same geographic location. And maybe we can move on, but the nun is still evil and has to be dealt with. DHS has more children in foster care than New York City, which is almost 4 times as large as our city. DHS itself has said that 80% of children are in foster care for lack of parental housing. No abuse, no neglect, no drug use. As parents could not provide adequate housing for their children. But yet, our housing authority is transferring vouchers for large row homes and giving them the project home to build efficiency apartments that are not permanent housing because they're really programs. And then these families are suffering and losing their children. And they can't afford to live, even if you go to work. How much is rent now? How much is rent now? Where can you even find an apartment with more than 2 bedrooms in it anymore? And I know, because I had a fire in 2019 when my house got firebombed. But I'm trying to find a place to go while we rehabilitate my house. And I wanted to stay in my neighborhood, which is 19th and Diamond. And there were really no apartments at all, because all of the housing PHA converted and gave to Project Home, and all of those row homes were now student housing. And then when PHA sells 10 houses on one block to student housing developers, the entire block ends up leaving because they're either taxed out, their rent goes up, or they can't take being in the middle of frat parties and temple police taking the side of the students no matter what the hell happens. And so there's no apartments for families, even if you work, even if you have money. Where do you go? Where can you find a 3 or 4 bedroom apartment or a whole house for rent anymore in Philadelphia that's affordable to the working class person? You can't. It's nowhere. But yet they're going to keep taking the vouchers from our row homes and replacing, and remind you, these are permanent public housing units. And when they transfer the voucher to Project Home, not only do they downsize the 5 and 6 bedroom from a row home, and not only do they move it from 18th and Diamond to the middle of Kensington, but they also sell the house. PHA can now sell the house at an auction for profit. And so then it gets sold and it gets turned into luxury condos and it gets turned into student housing, and entire communities are being displaced. Not just people who live in public housing, but working class homeowners, private renters. The whole entire communities are being flipped right here. Francisville, 10 years ago, probably like 7 years ago, I used to go to community college. I used to walk from my house at 19th and Diamond. Public housing everywhere. Mostly black, Puerto Rican people in this neighborhood. What do you see now? What do you see now? PHA gave Project Home all the vouchers, sold all the row homes, the developers knocked them down, and they built condos and luxury buildings and all this other stuff. And it's not fair and it's not right. If Project Home wants to build things like what they're building in Kensington, then they should apply for grants and for money for recovery housing. But they should not take permanent public housing vouchers. And then the other thing is that not only the voucher, once the voucher is transferred, it becomes a project-based rental assistance voucher that does not travel with the tenant. So like 2 years ago, I met the girl who was living right there at the JBJ Soul Homes. She became pregnant and had a baby, and she was kicked out on the street because she no longer qualified for the single room occupancy unit at Project Home. But because the public housing voucher was turned into project-based rental assistant, it also does not travel with the tenant. So if they go through domestic violence or neighbor disputes or have a baby and no longer qualify for the bedroom size, or have a child that passes on and needs somebody to take their kids in, they can't move with this voucher like they could when it was still a public housing voucher. So now people are going into these places that are called permanent housing, but how long do you think they're staying? How long do you think a woman of reproductive age is going to not recreate? How long do you think a 30-year-old man is going to not live in a place where he can't have his partner come and and spend the night. Do you think it makes sense to make people recovering from addiction or with mental illness live alone? To live alone? Do you know how dangerous that is? And then if they relapse, they can be kicked out. So they can't reach out to anybody. So now they die alone in a room. Or they get depressed if it's not drugs and overdose. People that are suffering from mental illness shouldn't be forced to be alone. Because sometimes company is what keeps people safe. But they can't have that here. But they pay rent. But they have to pay rent. And on top of their rent, they took the voucher from the public housing. So PHA is subsidizing the rest of the rent. So these units that they call affordable housing actually cost more per month than the average rent in the neighborhoods. It actually trigger the rising cost of living in the neighborhood because they're not affordable, they're subsidized.
Okay.